Whispers from Another World. The night was silent except for the sound of wind brushing through tall grass. The sky was unusually clear, and the stars looked brighter than they ever had before. On the edge of a quiet village, a boy named Ayan sat alone on a small wooden bench near the riverbank. He often came here when he couldn't sleep. The air was cooler at night, the world slower, and it gave him time to think. He tilted his head back and stared at the sky, letting the cold air fill his lungs. It felt endless up there. Then something happened. A single light tore through the night like a silver blade. It wasn't a plane. It wasn't a shooting star either. It moved too slow, glowing brighter as it descended toward the forest on the other side of the fields. Ayan stood up instinctively, his heart beating faster. He watched it until it disappeared behind the trees, leaving a faint shimmering trail. He didn't know why, but he started walking toward it. The grass was wet with dew, soaking the edges of his pants as he crossed the field. The forest was quiet, but not in a frightening way, more like it was holding its breath. As he stepped between the trees, a strange pale light shimmered through the mist. His pulse pounded in his ears, and then he saw her. A figure sat at the base of a large tree near the riverbank inside the forest. She was curled up, hugging her knees. At first, Ayan thought she was hurt. Then he saw her skin. It shimmered faintly like starlight, soft, almost silver, but warm. Her long hair floated slightly, as if gravity didn't quite hold her the same way. Her eyes were large and bright, reflecting the moonlight in a way he had never seen before. She looked lost. She didn't notice him at first. She just stared at the water as if trying to understand it. Ayan took one quiet step forward, then another. A branch cracked softly under his shoe. She turned instantly, her glowing eyes wide. For a moment, neither of them moved. Ayan slowly raised his hands to show he meant no harm. "Hey, it's okay," he whispered, even though he knew she might not understand him. She tilted her head slightly. Her breathing was shallow, her body tense like a deer ready to run. A soft, musical sound came from her, something between a word and a note. It was beautiful, even though he couldn't understand it. He took off his scarf and held it out, moving slowly. "It's cold," he said softly. She blinked, looking at the scarf like it was something from another world. Carefully, she reached out her delicate fingers and touched the fabric. Her touch was gentle, almost weightless. She pulled it close to her chest, as if it were the warmest thing she had ever felt. Ayan exhaled. Something inside him softened. She didn't speak his language, but she didn't need to. Her eyes spoke more than words could. He pointed to himself and said, "Ayan." Then he gently pointed at her. She hesitated, then whispered a soft sound. It wasn't exactly a name, but he caught something like Leora. It was airy, almost like wind passing through leaves. "Leora," he repeated. She blinked, surprised at the sound of her name coming from him. For the first time, a tiny smile flickered on her face. They spent the rest of the night sitting there by the water. He didn't ask questions and she didn't explain. They didn't need to. Sometimes she would point at the stars, then at herself, then back to the stars. He understood enough. She wasn't from here. As dawn crept through the trees, the world started to wake. Birds began to sing. She looked at the rising light with wide eyes as if seeing morning for the first time. Ayan wrapped his scarf around her shoulders. He whispered, "Come with me." He wasn't sure she understood, but when he offered his hand, she slowly placed hers in his. He led her through the trees, careful not to let anyone see them as they entered the edges of the village. He brought her to a small old storage shed behind his house, abandoned, quiet, and hidden. She looked around, curious at everything. He found an old blanket and wrapped it around her. She touched everything like it was new. For the first few days, it was like living in a quiet secret. Ayan brought her food and warm clothes. She learned to smile more, to mimic his gestures. She didn't speak his language, but every night they sat together in silence, listening to the wind, and it felt like they understood each other anyway. One night, when rain began to fall softly, she stepped outside into the open and raised her hands to the sky. Raindrops slid down her glowing skin like silver light. She laughed, a sound so soft and bright it made the whole world seem warmer. Ayan watched her spin slowly in the rain, her hair floating like silk. He didn't even realize he was smiling. She turned toward him, reached out, and took his hand. Her palm was warm against the cold rain. They stood there together in silence, fingers intertwined, while the night fell around them like a gentle song. As the days passed, she began to learn small words: water, sky, tree, star, friend. Ayan began to learn her sounds too, not real words, but soft melodies she made when she pointed at things she loved. She loved the sound of wind in the trees. She loved fireflies. She loved the feeling of touching the river at night. She hated the sound of car horns from the road far away. Sometimes she would stare at the sky with sadness in her eyes. Ayan could feel it even if she never said a word. He knew she didn't belong here, but the way she looked at him sometimes, it was something he couldn't explain. One evening, while the sun was setting, Ayan took her up to the hill outside the village. It was his favorite place, a quiet grassy field with a clear view of the stars. They lay side by side on the grass, the sky turning deep blue above them. Fireflies danced between the blades of grass. Leora pointed at the stars and whispered her soft language. Ayan turned his head to look at her. The starlight reflected in her eyes like 1,000 tiny suns. Without thinking, he whispered, "You're beautiful." She didn't understand the words, but she felt the weight of them. She turned to him slowly. Her glowing fingers brushed against his hand, not by accident this time. It was a quiet touch, warm and gentle. From that moment, something began to grow between them. It wasn't loud or sudden. It was quiet, like roots growing beneath the soil, strong and alive. But the world outside didn't stay quiet. Strange lights began appearing in the sky at night. Ayan saw them once, hovering far above the forest like distant stars moving in ways they shouldn't. Leora saw them too. Her smile faded. Her fingers trembled slightly whenever the lights appeared. She would curl up in the shed and press her hands against her chest, like she was listening for something only she could hear. Ayan sat beside her, whispering her name, holding her hand. She would look at him, her eyes filled with something that looked a lot like fear. Weeks passed. The bond between them grew. She began to trust him more than anything else in this world. He was her safe place. And he began to realize that somewhere along the way, he had fallen for her. Not like a boy who likes a girl at school, but in a way that made his chest ache every time she smiled. Sometimes he wished he could keep her here forever. But deep down, he knew stars don't stay on Earth. One night, as they sat by the river, she turned to him and placed both her hands on his face. Her skin glowed brighter than usual, and for the first time she whispered a new word she had learned. "Stay." It was the first word she ever spoke clearly. His throat tightened. He placed his forehead against hers. "I'm here," he whispered. She smiled faintly, but there was a quiet sadness in her eyes, like she knew that stay wasn't something the universe would allow forever. Above them, the night sky shimmered. A faint hum filled the air, low, distant, but familiar to her. She froze, her breath catching in her throat. The lights in the sky were closer now. The stars were calling her home. Ayan felt her fingers tighten around his. She whispered something in her language, soft and trembling. He didn't understand the words, but he understood the feeling. The air was colder than usual that night. Ayan could feel it pressing against his skin like invisible hands. The forest was silent, too silent, and even the wind seemed to have stopped moving. Leora stood next to him on the riverbank. Her glowing fingers wrapped tightly around his wrist. Her eyes were fixed on the sky, where faint streaks of moving light pulsed far above the clouds. It was the same kind of light he had seen the night she appeared. He wanted to say something, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he just held her hand a little tighter. She looked at him slowly, her silver blue eyes filled with a kind of quiet fear that didn't need a translation. She whispered a soft string of sounds, a melody that trembled like a small bird in the rain. "I don't understand," Ayan said quietly, "but I'm here." She pressed her forehead against his for a second, closing her eyes. The glow around her dimmed slightly, like she was trying to hold herself together. Then she looked at the sky again. A hum spread through the night, a sound that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. It made the leaves tremble and the water shiver in small rings. The lights in the sky flickered once and disappeared behind the clouds. She let out a breath she didn't know she was holding, then leaned her head on his shoulder. He wrapped his arm around her without thinking. They stood like that for a long time, just breathing, as the world slowly grew quiet again. Over the next few days, she became different, not cold but distant. She would walk outside before dawn, looking up at the sky like she was waiting for something. She would sit by the river alone for hours, dipping her feet in the water. Ayan watched from a distance, trying to give her space, even though every part of him wanted to hold her hand and say she could stay. But he didn't. He didn't want to be the reason she felt trapped. One evening, he brought her a small lantern. He had spent hours carving a soft flower pattern into its wooden sides. When lit, it cast dancing shapes on the shed walls. When she saw it, her face lit up like the stars. She touched the lantern gently, her fingers tracing the carvings. Then she touched his chest, right over his heart, and whispered softly, "Friend." He felt something warm spread through him at that moment. He smiled, and she smiled too. They sat together in the soft orange light, listening to the rain outside. She began to say more words after that. Her voice was always soft, like a whisper in the wind. Sometimes she got the pronunciation wrong and laughed quietly at herself. Sometimes he repeated her alien sounds back to her, and she'd press her hand against his face with amused surprise. The bond between them deepened like roots growing quietly underground. But the lights in the sky came back every night. Each time they appeared, she grew quieter. He could tell she was listening to something he couldn't hear. One night, a bright beam of light swept across the forest. It was faint but sharp, moving slowly over the trees like a searching eye. Ayan and Leora were lying in the grass near the hill when they saw it. She sat up quickly, her breathing uneven. Her glow brightened without her control. "Leora," he whispered. She looked at him with panic in her eyes. Her hands were shaking. Then she reached forward, grabbing both of his hands and pressing them against her chest as if trying to ground herself. He could feel her heartbeat, fast and light, almost like the wing beats of a trapped bird. "It's okay," he whispered. "You're safe. You're here with me." Her lips trembled. She whispered something that sounded like goodbye, but he didn't want to believe it. He pulled her closer, wrapping his arms around her as the beam passed overhead and disappeared into the night. For the first time since she arrived, she cried. It wasn't loud. It was quiet, silent, like rain slipping down leaves. Silver tears rolled down her cheeks, glowing faintly as they fell onto his hands. He held her tighter, even though he knew he couldn't protect her from the sky. After that night, everything changed. She didn't come to the shed at dusk anymore. Instead, she wandered toward the forest every evening, standing in the same place near the tree where he first found her. He followed her one night and saw her lifting her face to the stars, whispering in her language with both hands raised, like she was trying to call someone far away. The sound of her voice was beautiful and haunting, like the kind of melody that stays in your chest long after it ends. When she noticed him watching, she stopped. She lowered her hands and walked toward him. She didn't explain anything. She just held his hand and rested her head against his shoulder. Ayan didn't ask questions. He didn't need to. One afternoon, while they sat near the river, she pointed at a bird's nest hidden in a tree. A small bird was perched on the edge, flapping its wings nervously, trying to leave but too scared to let go. She pointed to the bird, then to herself, then to the sky. Ayan understood. She was the bird. She wasn't meant to stay. He wanted to tell her to stay anyway, to build her nest here, to live in his world. But he also saw the look in her eyes when she stared at the stars. It wasn't just longing. It was who she was. That night, the lights returned, brighter than ever. 3 beams spread through the clouds like rivers of white fire. The forest glowed faintly. The ground vibrated with a low hum. Leora stood at the door of the shed, her hair floating around her face like it was underwater. She turned to Ayan. She wasn't glowing faintly anymore. She was shining, like the light inside her could no longer stay hidden. He stepped closer. She took both his hands. Neither of them spoke. Then she reached up, placed her glowing palm on his cheek, and whispered slowly in his language, "Thank you." He froze. It was the clearest word she had ever spoken. She smiled softly, and for the first time, he saw a single silver tear slide down her cheek without trembling. The sound in the air grew louder. She stepped outside. The beams in the sky widened, lighting up the forest like daylight. Ayan followed, his heart pounding. He didn't know what he could do. He just knew he couldn't let her walk away without holding on for a second longer. When she reached the clearing where she had first landed, the light seemed to answer her. A column of shimmering white descended from the sky like liquid air, wrapping the trees in mist. Her hair lifted completely now, her glow merging with the light. She turned to him. He walked forward slowly, afraid that if he moved too fast, she'd disappear. When he reached her, she pressed her forehead to his one last time. "Leora," he whispered, his voice breaking. She whispered his name, too. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough to make his chest ache. She lifted his hand and placed it over her heart. It was beating fast, but steady. Then she slowly lowered his hand back to his side. The light brightened. She stepped back. He wanted to stop her, to scream, to hold on. But he remembered the bird at the nest. He couldn't keep her from flying. She closed her eyes and stepped into the beam. The air around her shimmered. She began to rise slowly, her feet leaving the ground like a feather caught in the wind. Ayan reached out. She reached back. Their fingers brushed, warm for the last time, and then the light took her. The forest was silent again. The mist settled slowly. Ayan stood there, staring at the empty space where she had been. The only thing left behind was his scarf. He walked forward and picked it up. It was still warm, faintly glowing for just a second, before fading into darkness. He pressed it against his chest and sank to his knees, listening to the sound of the river and the whisper of the night. For a long time, he stayed there, hoping maybe the light would return. But it didn't. Days passed. Weeks blurred together. The villagers spoke about strange lights in the sky, but no one really believed. Ayan said nothing. He kept the scarf folded under his pillow. He still went to the hill at night. He still looked at the stars. Some nights, when the wind was soft, he swore he could hear her voice in the air, a gentle whisper calling his name. He would close his eyes and smile through the ache in his chest. Somewhere far away, among the stars, Leora was looking up at the same sky, and that was enough. Ayan stopped going to the forest for a while after the night she left. The air didn't feel the same anymore. The river still whispered, the wind still brushed through the leaves, but everything felt quieter without her soft footsteps beside him. He carried her scarf everywhere, folded gently in his pocket like a fragile piece of light. At night, when the stars were clear, he lay on the hill where they had watched the sky together. He would close his eyes and remember how her hair floated in the wind, how her laugh sounded like rain against warm stone, how she had said his name in her soft, uncertain voice. It hurt, but it was a beautiful kind of hurt. The village moved on. People forgot about the lights in the sky. They said it was a storm or a trick of the night. But Ayan never forgot. He knew she had been real. He knew their time together was real. He didn't need anyone else to believe. Seasons began to change. The trees grew heavy with spring leaves. The river ran a little faster, carrying the smell of distant rain. Ayan grew too. He worked in the fields, fixed old machines, helped his neighbors. But no matter what he did, part of him still belonged to the night sky. One evening, a year after she had come, he returned to the forest. It was the same tree where he had first seen her curled up in the silver light. The same river, the same soft wind. Everything looked the same, but he wasn't the same boy anymore. He sat down on the cold ground and took the scarf out of his pocket. It was old now, the edges fraying a little, but when he held it close, he swore he could still feel the faint warmth she had left behind. He closed his eyes, then softly he began to hum. It was the little melody she used to whisper at night, the one she had sung to the stars. It had stayed in his heart like a quiet flame. For a moment, the wind shifted. A breeze brushed against his cheek like a hand. He opened his eyes and saw the fireflies gathering around him, glowing gently in the dark. And for a second, he felt her presence, not with his eyes, but somewhere deep inside him. He whispered, "Leora." The forest didn't answer. It didn't need to. The stars above shone brighter, as if they were listening. Ayan stood, walked to the river, and lifted the scarf high. "You're still here," he whispered, not because he expected a reply, but because saying it made the world feel warm again. The wind carried his words upward, and somewhere, far beyond the clouds, a girl with silver skin and starlight in her hair stood on the edge of her world, looking at a distant blue planet. She placed her hand over her heart and whispered his name softly into the stars. Even though they were worlds apart, the night sky connected them, not with touch, not with sound, but with something quieter and stronger. Ayan walked back toward the hill, where the stars stretched across the black sky like rivers of light. He lay down in the grass and smiled up at the stars. The ache was still there, but it wasn't sharp anymore. It was warm, a memory that would live with him for the rest of his life. He didn't need to wait for her to return. She was already part of him. The night wrapped around him gently. The stars shimmered above, and in that quiet moment, he felt at peace. Some stories don't end with forever. Some end with love that lingers in the air, soft and endless, like starlight that never fades.